Well, good morning. It is July the 28th, 2025, and straight from the highly caffeinated studio, this is According to Willie B, and I will be your host for the next half hour. So, interestingly enough, I received a few emails, and I've received some similar over the last few months that have asked me where my love for travel came from. And the more I thought about it, somebody sent me an email the other day and challenged me to do a podcast on exactly where my love of travel came from. And I thought, my last travel was Gainesville, and we've already talked about Gainesville, and I did uncover some more stuff, but I'll be back in Gainesville again in about 3 weeks, and I'll just probably combine those two to let you know some of the things that I found, which was, by the way, very interesting. But I kind of did want to pause after that last three-part series and talk about the love of travel and where my love of travel came from. So, to give you a little backstory, growing up, my dad fished in those national fish tournaments. It's called, I believe it's still in active. I believe it's still active today. It's BASS, and that it stands for something. I have no idea what it's for, but it is a bass fishing tournament. But all the integral workings of it, I have no idea. I just know that we traveled a lot because he fished those tournaments, and he did very well. There was times where he was in the top 10 in the nation, and he's fished with people like Ricky Clunn and Tom Mann and Roland Martin, just some of the top names. And it was really cool to see your dad fish with some of those names like that. But for us as a family, that meant we got to travel, and we traveled. So we traveled to Florida a lot, and that's why I had been to Disney World so many times. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite souvenirs, because somebody asked me this a while back, somebody asked me what my absolute favorite souvenir was. And over the years, I've kind of strayed away from all the trinkets and everything, but I do have a map of Disney World when it was just the Magic Kingdom. That was back in the early 70s, and that was truly remarkable to sit and unfold that map and look at it. It's especially as sprawling out as Disney World is now with all the theme parks and resorts, and the list just goes on. But really and truly, I think I've always thought that that's where my love of travel came from, was because we were always on the go. And my dad always told me that I should be a traveling salesman as much as I like to go. And he was right. If the car starts up, I'm like a puppy. I'm in the car with my head hanging out the window. No, not really, but I will be the first one in the car. And it's just something about the journey of going almost as much as the destination that you're going to. There's a lot of unknowns. Over my entire life of travel, I can tell you there's been a lot of times where travel didn't go as planned. You can plan until, your head will swim, but you're still going to run into some issues sometimes. And a seasoned traveler knows how to take it on the chin and keep on moving. I have sat and watched small details and sometimes large details come unraveled, and it just bewilders a person, and they have no idea how to react. And I think that comes from the more you travel, you get used to it. Flights delayed, especially nowadays. Flights delayed, flights canceled, hotels having no idea where your reservation is. Try that one in a foreign country. We don't have your reservation. No, I have it right here. Nope, we don't have that. Okay. So it kind of gets panicky when you're in another country and you don't have a room reservation and you have no clue where you are, how to get anywhere. You just want to go to sleep and get something to eat. Not necessarily in that order. I usually eat before I go to sleep, but there's that. So I did want to talk to you about some of the travels that I went through when I was a kid, and this was back in the early 70s. I remember most of our travels, we had a Chevrolet pickup truck with a camper. And it was, yes, it was very 70s. And my dad had taken a piece of plywood and put it across the bed rail. And us kids, because sometimes we had cousins that would go with us and what have you, but we would lay up on that bed so that we could look through the window and we could see out the windshield. And one of the things that popped up in my mind when I was thinking about that was there was a one of those little sliding windows. Only thing is, the parental hatch was on the inside of the cab, so we didn't have access to open it. We have to tap on the glass every time, and Mom would turn around and unlatch the window. Yes. So I thought about this, and I posed this as a question to each of you. Were you, and be honest, were you that child when your family went on vacation? Were you the child that said, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" I really wasn't, for two reasons. One, like I said, I enjoyed the journey. I loved reading the billboards back then because billboards were more of a thing. And back in the 70s, there was a ton of roadside attractions. So that meant there was more billboards advertising different things. And so it became a really neat journey just to read the billboards. So I never was really that child that kept going, "Are we there yet?" because I was into the journey. But I often wonder how many people, because you see it in the movies and things like that, so I ask you, be honest, were you that child that, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" Now, number two reason I was not that child because I knew my mom, and I knew my mom would, she she would silence you real quick. So if you were going to be annoying, so I tried to be the silent child, not all the time, but most of the time. But we had things in the travels because we didn't really fly. We always drove everywhere. Dad loved to drive, and that's where I get my love of driving from. We drive on most of our vacations if we can at all. Like the few weeks ago, we went to Pennsylvania. We drove, and it's because it's the journey. Now, I will tell you that one of the things that it wasn't a great memory then, but it is now. And my dad always had this way of telling you, because he didn't stop. He was the one, I think he was the one that actually invented nonstop flights, only it was a car ride. We would stop for gas, but that meant when you stopped for gas, that meant the bathroom, that meant food, that meant snack, whatever it was you had to have, you better get it while the car was stopped. And you better be back in that car or the truck by the time he finished getting gas. He always would tell us that he would leave us and pick us up on the way back if we weren't back in the truck by the time he finished. I don't know that he would have really left us, but I wasn't going to test that theory. I'll promise you that. He would joke and say that there were times where they have left kids at different stations, and they would just pick up other kids that got left by their parents. And so, it was creating all this crazy tales in our heads. So we just never tempted fate. We're just like, we'll just be back in the truck to make sure that we don't get left behind. But, I know they would have never left us, but it was funny. It's more funny now than it was back then. I promise you, you would already know what snack you wanted when you went into that service station, because you weren't going to dilly-dally. But we would have sandwiches. We didn't stop at restaurants most of the time when we were traveling. Now, once we got to the destination, we would go out to eat at different restaurants. Back then, there was the Sizzler, and there was the different places like that, the family steakhouses, etc. But we would stop and Mom would get a loaf of bread, a package of bologna, some chips, and some Cokes. And when I say Cokes, that means Cokes, Coca-Cola, nothing else. And and that's what you had. No mayonnaise, no mustard, no lettuce, no tomato, nothing like that. It was just bologna. And now that's another question: is it bologna or is it bologna? And I think that depends on the area of the country you come from. But we always called it bologna, so it's a bologna sandwich. But it was bologna on white bread, and that was it. And some chips and a Coke. And that's what you washed it all down with. Oh, Lordy, the times we had. But every now and then, I remember Dad would stop at a KFC. And we would stop at a roadside park and eat the KFC at a picnic table. Now, I remember the KFC back then that when they came out with barbecue chicken, oh, and I begged my dad, I said, please get some of the barbecue chicken. And he did, and I'll never forget. And that was the only time I ever had it. The next time we went back to go get some later on at another location, they didn't have it. But I remember that one time of having that barbecue chicken. And maybe that's where my love for food comes from, because if I ever have any food that is like really stand out good, I never forget it. I may forget where I had it. I may forget what country I was in, but I will not forget what it was and how good it was. So that's where the foodie in me comes from. So now you know where the travel and the foodie comes from. They say that different aromas and smells are tied to memories. And this is especially true for this particular memory. In St. Augustine, Florida, there was this in the old call, because it's like the oldest town or oldest city in the United States or whatever. And was this little section of downtown on these cobblestone streets. And I remember we walked into this gift shop, and it had this just amazing orange, or I'd say orange/citrus aroma. And I have never forgotten that aroma. Every now and then, I'll smell something that is similar to it, and it reminds me of those cobblestone streets in St. Augustine at that particular, you know, gift shop. And it's just so cool how an aroma or a smell can be tied to a memory. And every now and then I get a whiff of something that's like, oh my God, that's that smell. But that's a good thing, not a bad smell, not like dirty sock smell. One of my other favorite memories of travel back then as a child was when we would arrive. Now get this, when we would arrive, most of the time it was going to be a Howard Johnson. I don't know if my dad owned stock in Howard Johnson or if that was just his preferred motel. Hotels back in the early to mid 70s were not really as prevalent when you were traveling. It was more of the Holiday Inn, Howard Johnson, something along that lines. And that was the two main ones that we stayed in, Howard Johnson being the main choice. And I remember when you would walk into the lobby, there was all these racks, and they would be just a whole wall lined up with these racks of brochures of all the tourist attractions within probably 100 miles of that motel. And we would gather, as kids would gather, as many brochures as we found interesting, and we would go back to the motel room, and we would put them in the middle of the bed, and we would get up in the middle of the bed with my mom. And my sister and I would pick out the ones that we liked, and we would show them to my mom. Hey, this is really cool. We want to go here. We want to go here. And my mom would plan it out. And the next day, now this lady had a built-in GPS in her brain, because you got to think, there was not GPS back then. It was all paper map. But this lady, my mom, could find any tourist attraction within 50 miles of that motel. You just hand her the brochure, and she had a paper map, and man, we were there. And I just remember all those little details, things like that. Now we have GPS. You put in the destination, and you go. And honestly, one of the worst downsides to that is that most of your major highways and freeways, interstates, they bypass all of the little small towns where the story actually lives. And, you can say, well, that you're talking about the history. Well, yes, to some degree, but when you're on the interstate, you don't get the true story of where you're traveling. You don't get that part of the journey. So I promise you, I'm one of those that I'll use the GPS, but I want to take some side roads because I want to see some of the rest of the story that I'm not getting off of the interstate. So, like I said, it's part of the journey is one of the biggest parts to me. So there was that part with the brochures and stuff, and I still do that today, just like I'm a 12-year-old child. I go into a hotel, I look at the brochures, I'm like, oh, this is interesting, and I'll pick up that brochure and look at it, and a lot of times come to find out it's 200 miles away in the opposite direction. I was like, okay, well, maybe next time. But I hope that part never goes away. The billboards have kind of disappeared, but I hope that the brochures stay around for a long time because it's a really unique part of travel. But I'll never forget staying in those Howard Johnson motels. To this day, I can still see the original sign in my brain. I mean, it has an image of Howard Johnson, the old original sign, that will just never go away. It is burned into my memory for sure. So I also remember sometimes I remember, I believe it was for about a period of 2 to 3 years, we did buy a motorhome. Now, it's not like the motorhomes you see traveling up and down the interstate nowadays. No, no. This this motorhome was a cracker box, and all you have to do is just Google images of motorhomes from the early to mid 70s, and you will see what I'm talking about. They were not fashionable at all, but you did ride in style and you did ride in comfort. And I'll tell you, we kept it for a couple of years, but I think the biggest reason my dad was not a big fan of it, one was because of the gas mileage. Back then, it probably got 3 miles to the gallon, but I remember it created a different experience though, because the family's all in the same compartment, and you have conversation, you have the music on the radio, unless my dad was listening to some sports or talk show radio that was in the distance on an AM station that you weren't really picking up, so you got a lot of static. But he was able to pick some to decipher something out of it. I know he did. But I remember there was a song that came out in the early 70s, 72, 73, 74, somewhere about that. Bad Leroy Brown. I know some of you that are familiar with that song are grinning right now because you know where I'm going. And I figure, this was a time that, cuss words and stuff weren't really prevalent on television and radio. So you figure if something's in a song that it's okay to say. So I am singing along with my family to Bad Leroy Brown. And when it gets to the part where it says, baddest man in the whole damned town, I said that. And my mom quickly corrected me and said, that's downtown. And I was like, oh, I thought it was. And so then when I got older and realized she had corrected me, but I was right. It was what I thought it was, but she she corrected me real quick. I mean, it was like lightning speed, man. And I still laugh about it this day. And if I ever hear that song anywhere, it makes me laugh. And it reminds me of the time traveling down the road in that motorhome, hearing that song and singing it and saying that. And that's what I'm telling you. That's where the love of travel comes from. And it doesn't matter if you're traveling across town, across state, across the country, or across the globe. Travel is all about making those memories. I can literally go into a small town 10 miles away from where I'm at right now, and I can go over there and spend a day and create memories that will last me a lifetime. At this age, I'm not really into the trinket souvenirs anymore. They're all pretty much made in one spot anyway, and they're stamping whatever town or whatever state's name on it. but it's not the souvenir. But I will say, on that note, I will say, excuse me, I will say that there was one souvenir that I remember as a child, and it was extremely unique. Now, I don't know, y'all can let me know if they still have these, but they had them in different areas. I know Disney World used to have some. This has been years and years ago, but it was a wax figure, and you would put your don't laugh, but you put your quarter in. Yes, I said quarter, and these two molds would slide together on these metal rods, and you could see the colored wax going through the tubes into that mold. And then in a few seconds, the molds would separate, and it would pop out a little wax figure. And it could, most of the time in Florida, it was an alligator, but it could have been, like a Mickey Mouse. It could have been a lot of things, but most of the time in Florida, it was, whenever you found one of these, it was going to be a gator. And I just thought those was really cool. And I remember the smell of that wax, that hot wax figure, when it came out of that machine. But again, it wasn't that you just bought something, it was that you sit there and you saw it being made. And as a child, it had that magical moment to it that stuck with you for the rest of your life. I can still just vividly see that wax, that colored wax, going through that little plastic tube into that mold. And you would see the steam, and it would make all kind of noises, like, man, it was really doing something, when all it was doing was just injecting some hot wax into a mold. But as a child, it seemed very magical, and it created a moment that I've never forgotten, all for a quarter. And then I think the next time we got one, it was 50 cents. I don't remember ever paying more than 50 cents for one. I can only imagine, if there are some around today, what the cost is. I guess they probably have a credit card reader attached to it. Maybe a payment plan. I don't know. You never know these days. But, in all honesty, that is where my love of travel came from. And the memories that I have from even the earliest childhood of 9, 10 years old, I still have all those memories tucked away. And every now and then, something will trigger one of those memories, whether it be a smell, or whether it may be something that I see that reminds me of that time and reminds me of a simpler time. But, that's why I tell each and every one of you that travel is so important, because you're creating memories. And once again, I don't care if you're traveling across town or if you're traveling across the country, make time to travel. Go see that big wide world. There is so much out there to see, so much out there to experience. Different people, different cultures. It's an absolute just a gift to be able to go and experience different things. So I encourage each and every one of you to go out and travel. So that's pretty much what I have today, because I did want to put together this, where my love of travel came from. And now you know where my love of travel and food came from. I will tell you one more side story, and then I'm going to let you go. And I didn't think I was really going to include this, but I thought, you know what, why not? So my great grandparents would travel with us a lot. And two of the smells that I can remember very distinctly was, she had this little overnight case. And if you're over the age of 40, you are automatically know exactly what I'm talking about. And it was green, it was rectangle, and she had two little latches on there that I should have been welded shut, but I digress. She would open that case, and she would bring out this industrial sized jar of Noxema. I don't know what it is in that stuff that creates that smell, but wow, I will never forget when I think of Howard Johnson or Holiday Inn Express motel rooms. I, I kid you not. I think about the smell of Noxema, but I had to explain the backstory so you wouldn't think, what the world were you doing in a motel room with a jar of Noxema? And it was my great grandmother that had it, but the smell just incorporated the entire motel room. And then there was one other little trinket that she just insisted on traveling with in her suitcase. I almost expected her to have it in a gun belt because she could draw that stuff out of that suitcase like it was a six shooter. And it was these little tiny cans of prune juice. She believed that that was the cure all of health issues. And so I guess she convinced my dad, because my dad would always tell all of us kids that we had to each drink a can before bedtime. Oh, do I remember the taste of that. Between the smell of Noxema and the taste of the prune juice. But you know what? Today I look back on it and I laugh. And it was a great memory. And it amazes me sometimes when I stop and think about how all these memories come together and put together such an amazing picture of travel that I've been so blessed with in my life. But I hope each and every one of you have a great day. I greatly appreciate each and every one of you. Our listening base has continued to grow every single week. I can't even begin to tell you how humbled I am. We are well over 1,000 listeners every single episode. We are now in 15 different. We have listeners in 15 different countries. I have no words for that. It humbles me beyond belief. So I will definitely put something great together for you guys next week, and I will see you same time right here behind this big old mic. But remember, I got one important announcement, and that is, don't forget to caffeinate and conquer. Y'all have a great day. I appreciate each and every one of you. Bye-bye.